Once again, good morning everyone and welcome. So there is a message outline which is an insert in your bulletin, and if you will get that, then you can follow along with me. We're going to be looking at a few observations on making decisions. Life is made up of a series of choices, right? And our spiritual and physical success is dependent upon us taking some risk and making wise decisions. Now, a long time ago, there was a minister by the name of Frank Borum. He was fairly well known in his native England and where he did most of his ministry in New Zealand, wrote a few books. This quote is attributed to him. It says, "We make our decisions and then our decisions make us." That is so true. Definitely it's true in our spiritual lives. The challenge is decisions often have an element of risk and uncertainty involved. So we find ourselves asking the question, is this the right thing for me to do? Am I going to be able to keep my commitment as a Christian? And fear often prevents us from taking the first step. Now listen to this statement. It is true you can take risk and fail. No doubt about it. But it is equally true you have to take risk in order to succeed, right? And so does the Bible give us any advice about making decisions while at the same time minimizing the risk involved? And the answer is yes. So we're going to look at 8 decision-making observations from the book of Proverbs. And I have a little paragraph about Proverbs at the top of your outline. Proverbs consist of about 900 proverbs. A proverb is a general observation about life that is usually true, but not necessarily true under all circumstances. What I would like for you to do is, if you have access to the internet, on your phone, your laptop, your desktop, go to a site like BibleGateway.com and read through the book of Proverbs in the Good News translation. The Good News translation. It's in modern English, and it will really change your perspective on life and on your spiritual well-being. Now, there is no structure to the book. There are no main characters. There is no chronology, and so you can start anywhere you want. You can begin reading in chapter 17 and verse 3, and then go to chapter 4 and verse 5. Because each chapter, each paragraph is an independent unit. So here's what Proverbs says about decision making. Mostly written by Solomon. Okay, sometimes he didn't follow his own advice. He was human too. God gave him a lot of wisdom, but he did not necessarily follow his own wisdom all the time. Step 1 is pray for biblical wisdom. Pray for biblical wisdom. Wisdom is one of these common Christian words that we use quite a bit. It's right out there with love and mercy and grace and faith. And what I've discovered with a lot of these common biblical words is we hear them all the time, but we really never get around to actually defining what they mean. So what is biblical wisdom? What exactly are we asking God to give us when we pray for wisdom? So stated negatively, wisdom is not intellect. Not intellect. It is not technical smarts. And it is not education. We all know there are many educated fools walking among us. Just read the last part of Romans chapter 1, beginning in verse 18. So here's a couple of broad definitions of biblical wisdom. Number 1, it's the ability to see myself, my relationships, and my standing with God from His perspective and act on it. And two, it's a lifestyle of choices based on clear godly principles. So would you circle the word clear? Clear godly principles. So in Proverbs 28:26, it says, a man is a fool to trust himself, but those who use God's wisdom are safe. So depend on your instincts only after you have prayed for wisdom and sought out biblical principles that apply to your situation. Now, there are limits on what God's wisdom can do for you. There are limits to this. I mean, God is not going to point out specifically who you should marry. There's not going to be a red dot on their clothes with your initials on it saying, this is the one. However, God does, in His wisdom, tell us the kind of person we should be looking for. God is not going to tell you specifically how to spend your money, buy this car versus that car, this house versus that house, this pair of shoes versus that pair of shoes, but He does give advice on how to handle the aspects of your finances that are under your control. So step one is pray for biblical wisdom. Step two, this is short and sweet. Get the facts. Get the facts. In Proverbs 13:16, it says every prudent person, and prudent here is a good word, it doesn't mean they're a prude. It can have a bad meaning. Every prudent person acts out of knowledge. Excuse me. Where's my water? You read the passage again while I get a drink of water, okay? So there's two things. Number one is try not to make a major decision out of ignorance. And number two is, would you remember that not what everybody says to you religiously is true? We can't assume that what everybody says to us religiously is true. Now, if somebody's sharing an experience with you, that's fine. That's their personal experience. We're not going to deny that. But what people tell you you have to do or not do to be pleasing to God, not everybody is correct. In fact, in 1 John chapter 4, it says that not everyone who claims to be a representative of God really is. You have to test them. I was just watching something on YouTube, and it's public, and it's the David Taylor Ministries, and he holds crusades, but he's having some issue with the court and where all the money is going that's going into a part of the ministry and the non-charitable organization that goes around it with it. And the attorneys were asking about the Bentley, the car, the Bentley, and the $2.8 million house. He said, well, I really don't, that's kind of like the church is just buying it for a home. Yeah, like a big swimming pool on the back, and the church is buying that. And they said on your taxes it says that you have dependents, that you are subtracting it. And I said, well, I'm not sure who the dependents are. You couldn't name who the dependents are. Then they talked about the board of directors. He says, well, I'm not really sure who's on the board of directors. They talked about the location of the office. He said, I'm not exactly sure where the office is located. So they had some issues going on. And then there was a lady who was a part of this ministry, and she cashed in her 401k at $1.2 million and gave it to his ministry. And the lady said she felt like she was moved to do it. So they're asking her, where's all this money going? What I'm saying is that simply because someone says they represent God and that you need to do this or do that, it may or may not be true. You're going to have to check it against the book. This is Proverbs 18:13. What a shame, yes, how stupid, to decide before knowing the facts. One reason why people are baptized and they start the Christian life and then we never see them again is because they really never got around to counting the cost up front. In Proverbs 23:23, it says, get the facts at any price and hold on tightly to all of the good sense you can get. And this is true in spiritual and physical success. In the spiritual realm, you have to check on your own what the Bible says and then make a decision as to whether or not you are going to act on it. And that's one of the reasons for the outlines. It gives you a broad overview of the main points. It gives the scriptures, and you can go and look at them for yourselves. You can look at the context the scripture is in, and you can make a decision as to whether you're in agreement, not agreement, somewhere in between, as to how I presented it. But it gives you something to look at and to check out. So many times when people just speak verbally, we forget a lot of the details over a short period of time, just a matter of a few days. So get the facts. And then 3 is ask other people for advice. Now, we just got through saying that people are not the final authority, and that's true. But the beautiful thing is that people can give you insight. And you can talk to people who have been where you are planning on going, or where you want to go, or where you have to go. This is Proverbs 24:6. It says, the more good advice you get, the more likely you are to win. That's a generally true principle. In Proverbs 20:18, it says, get good advice and you will succeed. So it is wise to learn from your own experiences, but it is wiser to learn from the experiences of others, because life is too short for you to make all of the mistakes yourself. Now, maybe if, like back in Noah's day, we were all living to 800 or 900, maybe we would have time to make all of the mistakes ourselves. But at 80, 90, 100 years, learn from other people. There is a passage, for some reason, I'm not exactly sure why, Proverbs 20, verse 5, it's on your outline. It has become one of my favorite passages in the book, because it says that if you ask the right questions, you can learn from anyone. You can learn from anybody. Take a look at this. A person's thoughts are like water in a deep well, but someone with insight can draw them out. Do you know what we call that? The art of conversation. Now, sometimes we don't want to ask questions because we don't want to appear ignorant. But it is better to appear dumb than to make the mistake and let everybody know you are. So I ask dumb questions quite a bit of the time. No, not really dumb. Some might perceive it that way. In Proverbs 18:15, the intelligent man is always open to new ideas. In fact, he looks for them. And we want this principle to be true on an individual level, in your career, in your family life, in your church life. I think we need to be open to new ideas. As a congregation, we want to be open to what works and how are we going to connect with the people in our community. So ask people for advice. Number 4, set your physical and, well, I have backwards. Set your spiritual and physical goals. I was going to say physical and spiritual goals. Either way, set your spiritual and physical goals. In Proverbs 17:24, it says, an intelligent person aims at wise action, but a fool starts off in many directions. Now, I'm going to give you my paraphrase of that verse. You can't chase 2 rabbits at once. So focus on what you want in your spiritual life, in your relationship, in your career, and remember that selection is the name of the game, because you don't have time for everything. And it's frustration that often causes us to act foolishly. We get mad and we charge ahead and do something without thinking through the consequences. It's kind of like the old expression, jumping out of the frying pan into the fire. I think it's that way. They don't jump from the fire to the frying pan, do they? No? Okay. So set your goals. And then number 5 is count the cost of your decision. Count the cost of your decision. Now there's 3 questions that can go along with this. Is the decision necessary? Is there any way you can reach your goal without making this decision? 2, what will it cost? In terms of commitment, time, energy, money, everything worthwhile has a cost attached to it, including Christianity. Hello? Everything that's worthwhile has a cost attached to it. How about a relationship? Have any cost attached to it? Anybody here want to lie and say no? Your career has some cost attached to it. It is the same way with Christianity. It's worthwhile, but there's some cost attached to it. And then 3, is the decision worth it? Now here's what I mean by this. Will the potential profit or reward be greater than the risk involved? I know you count the cost. I know in counting the cost and taking some risk in being a Christian, it's not always easy, but is the reward going to be greater than the risk? And we're all here because, yes, we believe the answer is yes. Proverbs 20:25 says this, it is a trap to dedicate something rashly and only later to consider one's vow. And this is great advice for an impatient society. We all know that it's easier to get into something than it is to get out of it. It is easier to get into debt than it is to get out of debt. And it is easier to fill your schedule than it is to fulfill it. And so life is full of decisions, but applying biblical principles can minimize the risk by making you aware of the risk. See, one of the ways we minimize risk is by making ourselves aware of the risk. Sometimes if you know the risk, then that's going to minimize the risk. So here's the key point, is never make a decision when you're tired or depressed. Make your important decisions when you feel at your best. Now I understand feeling at your best is relative. It may not be feeling the same way that you felt in 1983. So in the context of your life now, when you feel the best, that's when you're going to make a decision. Someone's spouse passes away and they say, I'm selling my house and I'm moving to Phoenix in 2 weeks. Well, maybe, maybe not. You have to kind of think these things through. So count the cost. And then number 6. This is good spiritually and physically. Is be prepared for problems. Be prepared for problems. In 22:3 of Proverbs, we're back to that prudent person again. A prudent person foresees the difficulties ahead and prepares for them. The simpleton goes blindly on and suffers the consequences. Now we are all familiar with Murphy's Law because we've all experienced it. It goes something like this. If something can go wrong, it will. Now you can't ignore problems because problems are not going to ignore you, and eventually you're going to meet each other. And this passage says it's wise to meet problems on your own terms by planning ahead in advance and anticipating what might go wrong when that's possible. It's not always possible. Sometimes things happen and boom, it's right there. But in other situations you have time to think about things that could go wrong. Planning for what might go wrong is not being negative, it's being sensible. Or to use the Living Bible paraphrase, it's being prudent. And then 7 is confront your fears. We have to confront our fears. We hate to admit it when we're afraid because we think it's a sign of weakness when actually fear is a sign you are real. You are real. Hello, real person. Fear, like all of the other emotions God has given us has a purpose. One of those purposes is it's a warning light. And only a fool would never be afraid. Proverbs 14:16, speaking of fools. A fool plunges ahead with great confidence. Plunges ahead. I'm going out to invest a bunch of money in my business today. Why? Because I feel good about it. Have you researched it? No, but I feel good about it. I'm going out to buy this house today because I feel good about it. Have you done any research? Is it going to appreciate it? I just feel good about it. I'm going to be baptized because I feel good about it. You need to feel good about it. Don't misunderstand me. But there has to be a reality of the costs that are involved. Now, Proverbs 29:25 says, fearing people is a dangerous trap. It's a trap, like a big trap, like a snap. I don't know if that was a very good trap. That's the best trap I could do. But trusting the Lord means safety. So what will people think if I am baptized? What will people think if I fail as a Christian? That's the trap. You can't be afraid to make a decision in your spiritual life if it is based on God's truth. So how do you confront your fears? What do you do with your fears? Well, this is Proverbs 14:26. Reverence for the Lord gives confidence and security to a man and his family. That's the good news, you could say, to a woman and her family. So circle confidence and security. When you reverence the Lord, which means when you respect the Lord, He will give you the confidence and the security to face your fears. Not that He's eliminating all of your problems, but He's going to give you the inner strength that you need to hang on to your faith no matter what. Mark Twain, the well-known American humorist, author, lecturer, this quote is attributed to him. Courage is not the absence of fear. Courage is moving ahead in spite of your fear. See, courage is not about no fear. No fear. No. There's fear. It's just you're moving ahead in spite of it. Captain Eddie Rickenbacker, who was a World War I ace, probably the first major war where airplanes were used in that context. He was also a recipient of the Medal of Honor. He said, courage is when you do what you're afraid to do. And so you can't let fear stop you from doing what the Lord clearly wants. You can't let the fear of other people, your family, anybody, stop you from doing what the Lord wants you to do. And then number 8 is make the decision and go for it. Make the decision and go for it. Go for it fills in the blank. It'll come up on the screen in a minute. So, there is the point of decision when you stop worrying about the risk and discussing everything that can go wrong and you start acting. It is called the point of commitment. It happens in marriage, it happens in a relationship. It comes to the point of commitment, right? It happens in business, it happens in school, it happens in church. There comes the time when, okay, the decision is made, now act on it. In baseball, you can't go to second base without taking your foot off of first. And using that as a metaphor, you can't go to the next stage in your life until you take your foot off of first base. Now maybe first base is comfortable. And it's close to the dugout if you're on that side of the field. It's easy to get to the dugout and you can just walk over there. But the foot's going to have to come off. In Proverbs 16:3 it says, commit to the Lord whatever you do, and your plans will succeed. Commit to the Lord. Whatever you do, and your plans will succeed. And I would like to add, but you do have to take a risk. You do have to take a risk. So I want to share with you some people who decided not to take a risk. Have you ever heard of any of these names? Mike Smith and Dick Rowe. Mike Smith and Dick Rowe. They decided not to take the risk, that they did not feel like it was worth the time and the trouble and the effort to sign a contract with an unknown musical group called the Beatles. Who is going to listen to the music from a band named after a bug? So they said, we're not interested in the contract with these Beatle people. William Morton. He was the president of Western Union and Telegraph, and he had the opportunity to take a risk and invest in the patent for the telephone. And for our younger people, I was actually going to put a picture of a telephone up here. Maybe I've never seen one. There used to be what was called a telephone. It's not really like your cell phones. It's a little different. I haven't seen a telephone in a while, and I haven't seen a phone book in 10 years. This is what he said. This is his quote. What use could this company make of an electrical toy? End quote. We've got the telegraph, man. Telephone. Got the telegraph. John and Forrest Mars. John Mars and Forrest Mars, the Mars brothers. Oh, you recognize these guys from their product. M&M's. John Mars, Forrest Mars, the Mars brothers. So they got a call from Hollywood. We're doing a movie, and we would like M&M's to be the product placement. I don't know what it was going to cost them. I read in one article $1 million. I don't know if that, I haven't, that's just one article. So $1 million, it cost $1 million. And we have a scene with a little boy, and we think your M&M's would fit in perfectly. And so the Mars brothers thought about it and said, I don't know, $1 million for a product placement for a few seconds in a movie. Come on, I think probably we can use our money to advertise in other areas and be much more successful. So they turned them down and said, no, we're not going to do it. So the product placement, by the way, who likes M&M's? I got it. You got it. You didn't ask for it. Glory asked for it. You're not going to get it. I'm going to give it to you, but you'll never see it. So, the product placement went to Hershey's newly released Reese's Pieces. The producer was Steven Spielberg. The movie was E.T. And the scene was the little boy dropping Reese's Pieces, which would have been M&M's, along the trail to lure the alien. And he gets to have that little alien scene where they touch and they have candy together. Sales of Reese's Pieces went through the roof, over 300%, and it became one of the greatest sales advertising of candy in history. Nobody hardly remembers the people who did not take a risk. Now, God never intended for you to live risk-free. Certainly not in your Christianity. What do you do in other areas? But not in your Christianity. He expects you to step up and make the commitment. He expects you to step up and make the contribution with whatever you have that you can offer. I'm amazed at how many people were turned away by Jesus. You know, not everybody followed him. Not everybody could handle what he was teaching. In Luke 14:28, Jesus said, you want to be a disciple? My disciple? Don't begin until you count the cost. For who would begin construction of a building without first getting estimates and then checking to see if there is enough money to pay the bills? So the Lord wants you to count the cost, take the risk, and follow him. And how do you do that? You do it by the 8 steps that we have talked about. Jesus took a big risk when he decided to die for us on the cross. He gambled, if I'm allowed to use that term in a religious context. Will you allow me to use gambling in a religious context? He gambled that you would respond to it. I mean, what if you take the risk and die on the cross and no one responds to it? Jesus challenges you to put your spiritual life into his hands. You will still have problems and fears, but the antidote is the faith you'll find in your heart when you make that commitment. So I want to ask you, do you have a personal relationship with Jesus Christ? Have you been baptized the biblical way by immersion? You need to take the risk and go for it. Because it's what God clearly and concisely wants you to do. And it will be the best decision that you ever make. And so Hank is making his way up to the front, and he's going to lead us in our invitation hymn. If you have a need, let us know what it is while we stand and sing.